if you know that there's a hurricane coming, or you know there's severe storm coming, the best thing to do is take inventory. Go through your home and find out, for one, is there any vulnerability?
Hey everybody, happy Friday.
Mortgages and my money. Yes.
Cheers.
Y'all.
I think it's always good to check in. If something changes with your house, like what if you do add a security system or you add a trampoline or something changes with your house? I mean, it's always good to contact you and say, hey, do we need to update our policy because of XYZ?
This is very common, and it's something that I've been having conversations about a lot lately is that, the old school mentality, and I work for State Farm and the farmers and the farm bureaus, they have, some of these carriers have had this specific risk for a long time, right? And so there's not really any updates. They kind of just keep the policy going, and then they have a claim, something happens, and then they'll come back and start looking at that policy because they had a claim. Mm-hmm. So yes, always, if you've done an update, if you've remodeled, if you've done your, if you say you had, an older home, we call EHP, electrical, heating, and plumbing, and you've updated that. That also is a good rating for your home, and that could ultimately also save you money because you updated. You had a home that was built in 1986 and you still had, galvanized plumbing that was there, whatever that is, but you've updated it to PEX. You've updated everything, like your heating, all of that. If you let your insurance company know, more than likely that's going to be a better rating for you. Mm-hmm. Or if it doesn't for them, moving on to a new carrier, you can say, I do have this new electrical, heating, and plumbing, a new roof, and ultimately you had a higher premium because they're looking at how old the home was and they didn't know whether or not you had an update to it. Now they know and say, okay, this is a better risk for us. It's in our appetite. It's not an older home. It's not, at risk of having a flood or not necessarily a flood, I'm sorry, like water damage in the homes because it's been updated. And so, yes, always key to let your insurance carrier know that you've done these updates because, again, especially if you're with a State Farm, they have no idea, and unfortunately, they don't go and look at it until you call attention to that policy.
Okay. You brought something up too. I mean, that's something that you can then shop for them too, is going, okay, this carrier may not give you a discount for this, these changes, but then you can, basically reshop it to other carriers that will, give a discount or better premium.
Exactly, yeah, and and that's sort of the thing that really people have to pay attention to is, making sure that the policy that they have is going to suit them for their needs, right? Not everything always is what it seems, and that's why I always tell people, you have a broad policy, A, B, C, D, E, and F, and then you have endorsements. Find out what those endorsements are. Find out if you're covered, outside of your A, B, C, D, E, and F, because of the fact that a lot of these little things behind, like seepage behind the wall where it's after 14 days, that's not something on a policy that you're covered on. And these are all little, like I said, nuances that I could keep finding and going and
talk all day.
Exactly, and unfortunately, we don't have all day. So that's why it's good to actually sit down and have the conversation with your agent.
Yeah. So we're going to jump really quick into talking about the hurricane. And two things we want to cover is one, what to do to prepare for one. You brought up something earlier that I want you to cover as far as, if somebody doesn't have coverage for certain things, they hear that a hurricane's coming, they call their insurance agent and say, I need to get my policy updated to add this coverage. Can they? And we'll go over that. And then second question is, after something devastating happens, like a hurricane, like we're seeing down the Houston area, what is the first steps you would recommend for them to do? Because I'm sure insurance, the carrier, everybody's blowing them up. So what should they do, kind of in the aftermath as far as like, and this might be great information for people out there right now that are going, I have never experienced.
No, good questions all around. And to be honest, when it comes to where we're going through right now in September, we're coming up with hurricane season, right? But hurricane season's hitting earlier. Obviously, we just had one. It just hit the Houston area. And what you need to be, for one, if you know that there's a hurricane coming, or there's severe storm coming, the best thing to do is take inventory. Go through your home and find out, for one, is there any vulnerability in your home? do you need to, block up your windows? Do you need to make sure that, the exterior of your home is wherever that is, whether it be your roof, if you've got an issue going on, to make sure that you mitigate as much as you can from having damage from that. So doing an inventory check, if you've got to evacuate, making sure that you get all your belongings that you need as far as that's going to be worth taking with you, right? I mean, obviously you can't take everything with you, but you also want to make sure that you cover your home while you're out of the home, right? Because at the end of the day, you don't know what's going to happen. There could be somebody, as far as vandals, things like that. You want to make sure that you cover yourself on that part. But the biggest key that I can tell people is check your policy. Besides doing the inventory, besides making sure that everything in your home is set up for ultimately a catastrophe, making sure that you contact your insurance company and then make sure that for one, you're covered, right? Because unfortunately, I find out a lot of people, don't really pay attention if their policy has been canceled or if they've had some sort of change, like a deductible, because they automatically get a deductible change because now everybody's going to 2%. So making sure that you call your insurance company to make sure, for one, that you're covered, that you have wind or hail, what your deductible is, and making sure that, for one, that you have specific coverage for, say you're in an area in a flood zone. Do you have flood? Because flood is not covered on a homeowner's insurance policy. You have to have a separate policy for that. So these are all little things that you really need to think about, but the reality is contacting your carrier and making sure that you're covered and making sure that you have coverage for wind or hail if that storm were to hit your home. And that's a big thing that I think a lot of people just don't know that to do.
Well, and I think that's a good point, is when you know something's coming like this, I mean, we all were warned about this hurricane coming, is calling and knowing what is covered, what's not covered. That may change, like you said, how much do I need to be boarding at my house and doing, depending on what type of, how much coverage you have or what is covered inside your house. Because you may say, hey, I'm gonna board up a little bit more because I know that I don't have,
right, exactly,
coverage or this much coverage, or anyway.
And so the other thing too is that carriers, they all know and they watch the weather very well. I mean, this is what they do. They want to get out in front of it to let, like especially with Goosehead will send out, notification that there is going to be ultimately a hurricane and what to look out for and how to set yourself up, just in case there is damage. So there is carriers out there that do let you know. But the one thing that I want to let everybody know is that during that process, say like we knew that there was the hurricane that was coming just recently, about 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago. Right then, a moratorium is set up through that carrier. That carrier will not allow you to make any updates to your policy, meaning you can't call and change your deductible. You can't call and add coverage to your policy. None of that. So that's why you want to make sure beforehand that you have all of that set in place before a catastrophe happens, because you don't want to wait till the end and then find out, okay, well, I have a 5% deductible. I want to change that to 1% or a 2% deductible if they allow you. And they call a week beforehand and they're like, wait, there's a moratorium. There's no way you can make a change to your policy.
So I'm gonna repeat what Aaron just said, because I found this interesting. I mean, I assumed that you couldn't change it, especially it's like, hey, it's kind of like, health insurance. You can't just decide, oh, I, found out that I have, some kind of illness and now I'm gonna call and get insurance. It doesn't work like that. Same with homeowners insurance. Once that, what was the word you said?
Moratorium.
Moratorium. I like that word. So once that time frame, once they find out, like at that point, you can't change it.
Exactly. And we as the agents will, whenever we go into that carrier site, like just an example, like Progressive or Travelers, the first thing that pops up when we enter the carrier site is binding restriction. And that binding restriction will list out every single county that's going to be impacted by this storm. And basically what it'll tell you is that they'll give you a specific date from when that moratorium starts, and then they won't give an end date, but usually it's about a 2-week process. So you can't make any changes for about 2 weeks, and it all depends on the carrier. The carrier can hold on to the moratorium for as long as they want, but the reality is most carriers, once it's passed, like this one just passed, they're going to have a moratorium up probably until next week. So we won't be able to make changes on anybody's policy probably till the week after, just because they want to make sure that they mitigate anything on their end so they don't have any issues as like changing deductibles. They're just not going to allow you to do that, unfortunately.
Because once you make that change, say in like a week or two, once that time has passed, it's more for it's going to be coverage for going forward
Exactly,
anyway. So I'm sure they're like,
exactly.
we're not going to change it too soon because we need to make sure we know the condition of the home.
Yep, and that's the same thing that goes for people. When I've had this where, there is a loss and then they call and they say, hey, I'm gonna change the deductible and then I'm gonna file the claim. Well, that claim actually happened prior to that. So that deductible moving forward, whatever you have a claim will be adjusted during that time. But if you had a claim prior to that, they're only gonna go off the deductible that you originally had.
Okay. I thought that was very good information.
Yes, yes.
Personally. Last thing we'll talk about is last question will be, what should they do aftermath? I just assume call the insurance agent, obviously your carrier, to find out, what's next, as far as what, the damages.
Right.
So
yeah, that's key. You don't want you don't want more loss, right? So whatever you can do to mitigate less loss. So, getting in contact with the insurance carrier agent as soon as possible to get the claim going is what you want to do. You want to make sure that you take inventory for, if there's any losses on anything, making sure that you, take pictures, whatever you need to do to take that inventory. And then when you call your insurance company, the way I always tell people is I want you to call me as the agent first. Now, I'm not going to be able to do anything. I can't go out there and fix anything for you. But what happens is you have a bunch of claims coming in, right?
Right.
So what happens typically is there's a wait time. And during that wait time, people get frustrated. So if you have an agent involved, then they're in the loop of what's going on. They can contact the carrier and say, hey, where are we at on this?
Yeah.
And give the insured peace of mind. Because at the end of the day, that's what you want. You want peace of mind. Not everything's going to come together right away, unfortunately, especially if there's been multiple impacts. Like if there's a whole subdivision that's been involved with it, it's going to be tough because labor, material, all that goes up and it's in demand. And unfortunately, there are wait times. But what I can tell you is stay in communication with your agent and making sure that you're working with the adjuster and staying on top of that. That's key. And then just making sure that your agent is 100% involved is what I say because it'll make your claim process much smoother.
So, and correct me if I'm wrong, so basically, calling your insurance agent first, taking pictures.
Yep.
Would you recommend not really doing anything right away? Like take your pictures, contact you or your insurance agent to kind of get their advice too. To say, hey,
yes,
what do I need to do? Walk me through the steps, because it will be a process,
It is, and water damage usually is going to be what's, the biggest thing when we have a hurricane and stuff like that. It could be wind force rain that gets in, and I want to get into that, but there are a lot of different things that could happen that could cause damage inside of the home. What you want to do is make sure that that you're going in and clearing what you can, right? If there's water damage, get rid of the water in there so it doesn't cause more damage, right? You don't want to get into, you can't fix anything. You're not trying to fix anything, but you want to air out your wherever damage there is, or because of the fact that you don't want there to be more damage. You don't want there to be, if you could avoid mold or you can avoid anything like that by going in and cleaning up what you can. That's actually part of your job, is to make sure that there's no more loss after the initial loss. And that means, doing what you can to mitigate any more problems.
Awesome. Well, I thought this was very helpful. Thank you.
Yes. And there's so much more. Honestly, I could sit here and think of so many different things.
Y'all should see when Aaron and I get on the phone. It's like, I'll ask one more question and then he'll answer it, and then oh wait, that prompted me for another question. So there is so much to be covered. I think we covered a lot here today, but I really appreciate you saying everything that you said, because I think at least it gives people steps of what to do next. And again, especially with what we're seeing happen and going into what we think might be kind of a crazy hurricane season.
Yeah, Texas is one of those things that's very unpredictable. And doing what you can to mitigate a claim on your end, talking about your policy, knowing what your coverage is.
Knowing your coverage.
That's honestly all you can do. And if you're doing that, then you're ahead of the game than most people, because I'll tell you, so many people, and I don't mean this in a bad way, are just ignorant to what what their policy is.
Yeah.
And why would you know about it? That's not your job.
Right.
So let the professionals tell you. Keep in contact with your agent, or at least contact your carrier and make sure that you're covered.
Yeah.
And make sure that you have what you need in case there is a loss.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Aaron. And thank you everybody who has made it this far into this. So, all right, until next time.